Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future regular commission meeting, 3:15 p.m. Apologies for the delay. We had a little technical difficulty getting into the system here. Martin Heft, Undersecretary of Intergovernmental Policy and Planning Division, co-chair, and with me is Representative Jason Rojas, my illustrious co-chair.
I prefer esteemed, but thank you.
Esteemed, okay, you can be both. Our first order of business is we've got to check to see if we've got enough members here on it, but we have our minutes of May 1st, looking for a motion to accept those.
So moved.
By Francis. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Representative. Any discussion, questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are passed. Quick update on legislative. We know that we had House Bill 6647 concerning the state plan of conservation and development. It was passed by the House with an amendment sent up to the Senate, but the Senate took no action on it. So that died during this session. And we'll get into that as we review the priority listing that we have coming up shortly. And with that, the Excel spreadsheet that was sent out to everybody that outlines all of the work groups and the individual recommendations. Part of our process is to start going through this and ascertaining if there's a financial impact, whether legislative action's required or it's an administrative function. If legislative action would be the committee of cognizant, a priority level, whether it should be, immediate or future. And obviously we'll put in discussion dates and assignment next steps, everything. Part of this process is to go through. So when we have to do our final report back to the General Assembly due January 1st of 2024, we can use this as our guide. We're not going to be voting on any individual recommendations at this point because we do want to go through and just make sure we've got an overview of all of them. As we know, we have a lot of recommendations, and Representative Rojas and I have talked. And one of the things we want to do is we're going to start with the state municipal plans, just because we've kind of have that tracked already, to kind of show the outline of how we're going to handle this. We can start going through some of them, but then we are going to ask that the work groups go back to each of their respective sections and complete the chart. And get back to us. So at our next meeting, we'll have kind of a complete chart on this. Otherwise, we could be here for several meetings trying to just get through everyone individually on a first run basis. And that will allow us time at our July meeting to go through all of them and looking at the recommendations and the outline of that. Do you have access to call up the Excel spreadsheet on the shared screen? If not, I may be able to. Okay. Bear with me a second. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. And I apologize, it may be small to see on the screen because I can't see it from here, but I've got it on my computer. So, but if you follow along, I'm going to start with the state and municipal plans, which is on the first page, about bottom two sections of that, just to kind of run through what we have outlined. So as you may remember, we had a number of recommendations from the state municipal plans work group of things to include this legislative session. which we know, as discussed just a little bit ago, was House Bill 6647. So as we went through each of those sections, you'll see that, none of them had financial impact, that it was a legislative requirement. The legislative committee was, planning and development. It was immediate because obviously needed to be done this session. The actions, assignment, next steps was, we had noted there, was referred to the P&D committee for bill submission. That was done, 6647. It passed the House, but no Senate action. Part of the piece now is we have to look through, as these were items that were looked at for this next plan of conservation development, which is in process now, was to change and clarify some pieces. Now that this hasn't happened, they'll be working on the state plan as it is, as was originally done, without any of these amendment changes. Not to say we can't include these in our report, to say these should be looked at for future plans or additions in that sense. So we would make those comments over to the end on that. We did have one other item under planning and development. Whoops, sorry, went up too far. Which was noted there that further changes may be warranted on the C&D plan gets developed, particularly to the, I can't read my screen, sorry. Particularly to 16A-35C, priority funding areas, and the locational guide map. And that'll be something that'll be kind of discovered as we go along. We noted that was, a future item in that sense. So that's what we're looking for each of the pieces on here as we move forward. So in one sense, the state municipal plan section is pretty well, completed at this time for us to go through. Does anyone have any questions on that section? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, Francis.
In the development of the locational guide map, are guidelines being given for the selection of the locations, or is that being left up to OPM?
Well, remember that OPM it's not OPM's plan. It's General Assembly's plan. Right. So OPM is just the staff to all of that. So that'll be all part of the process, of developing the plan.
Thank you, because in previous versions, it was essentially a GIS suitability or index analysis, where the factors were unweighted, which meant they had equal weighting. And to me, it wasn't clear that some of the infrastructure was hard infrastructure, fixed, you can't move. Some was mobile, such as buses, and some of it was, of course, environmental features that you can't move. So there may be an opportunity for weighting more heavily factors or features that are fixed and can't be moved and ones that can be.
Great. What I'm going to do is add that into the notes section here under that, just so that way we do have it. Perfect. Thank you. Anything else on the state municipal plans? Apologies, I had to look at both screens here to see if anyone's raising hands. So, okay. So we can move up and at least start looking at the consolidated housing plan. And obviously we'll ask our members of that group to also weigh in as we go through these on it, and kind of just we'll run through this one here and see how long that may take us. The first one is require regular state housing needs assessments every 5 years and incorporate findings. The state should require biennial housing needs assessments every 5 years and incorporate findings by setting clear, measurable targets, strategies, and funding dissemination priorities aimed at meeting the most critical needs identified in those assessments. And I should caveat all of this by, we do have a housing bill that's been passed with a lot of different provisions in it as well. That still is going through and obviously being analyzed and everything. So if my good co-chair knows of something that's already been done as we go through some of these, please, let us know for that. Francis.
This may betray my ignorance on this subject, but what is the purpose of requiring a biennial assessment every 5 years?
It should be every 5 years. I think that was a typo in an earlier draft that made it into this final one. The final report should be correct. So we'll work with the staff to make sure that they're working off of the final draft, but it should say every 5 years as it does in the recommendation.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we'll take that right out of there. So now it says require every 5 years. There we go. Get that updated on that. Thank you, Kylie.
Yep.
So this would be, legislative.
It could be. It could also be. I think it could also be an administrative direction. I don't know that you need a legislative action here to require that, or whether simply administratively directing DOH to do that would be as part of the consolidated plan, may be applicable to most or all of the items on here. There would be a financial impact, I think, for this, because doing a really thorough housing needs assessment will take either additional staff or outside consultants. So that once every 5 year process, which aligns with the consolidated plan, which is produced every 5 years, will take additional support for DOH.
Whoops, can't type. Okay. Okay. And any thoughts on priority for, immediate future?
It would be, I believe, the next housing needs so the consolidated housing plan is 2025. So there was a housing needs assessment done a few years ago, but ideally you'd have one done in time to inform the consolidated plan, which DOH has started the process of working on, to the best of my knowledge. So I think almost all of these, it will be, the priority level will be pretty much immediate because that process is already in place. So, and I would just put in the notes for all of these that these should be incorporated into the planning process or part of the construction process of the 2025 consolidated plan.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Francis?
Kylie, if I can ask you a question. So DOH prepares the consolidated housing plan. Is the thinking of the subcommittee here that DOH also prepare the housing needs assessment, or would that be prepared by a third party such as CHAFA?
Originally, as we were discussing this, it was DOH that would prepare that plan. But as we noted in the report, that assessment and the consolidated plan itself should incorporate, or it could be a vehicle for the consolidation of other housing plans, of which CHAFA does some as well. The report notes that there are sort of multiple different planning processes in the state, but none of them have an overarching goal as to what our housing infrastructure needs to look like based on that assessment. So could it be done by CHAFA? Sure. But since the consolidated plan and most of those housing plan and housing policy direction lives within DOH, that makes the most sense, I think, unless there's others.
I would concur with that. And I would also suggest that we keep in the back of our mind that there is a huge diversity of housing needs, housing types and locations, and that having a scope that everybody can see before the analysis starts and comment on the scope would be helpful to ensure that we don't accidentally omit any fractions of the market or public.
Great. Thanks. Anything else on that one?
Nope.
Okay. Second one, tailor plan to communities. Consolidated plan should be tailored to communities, creating clear guidance and measurable targets for affordable housing, preservation, development in rural, suburban, and urban communities that reflects the attributes unique to each that make housing development ideal or more challenging.
Yep, this would be the same. Again, it's possible it would require some additional staffing for any number of these because it will require additional work for the consolidated plan. But beyond that, it's really the same notes would apply to each of these. And there's more detail in the report as to what DOH may want to consider as part of this tailoring plan to communities component.
Yeah, that's great. Any other comments or thoughts on that? Okay. I know, and thanks, Kylie. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Nika.
Kylie, I don't know if you've thought about this, and I actually haven't put any thought in this. There's a lot of overlap, I think, between what we had in mind when we drafted that language and the language from the full report itself, I think is clearer on this point. Between that and some of the criteria that are in the, I don't know what to call it, the like fair share study language from the housing bill that passed last week. So I don't know what the implications are for that to this. Like it suggests that maybe there isn't a financial impact because that will already have happened, but it also suggests something about the relevant administrative agency. I certainly wouldn't want DOH to do something that another agency or itself have already been directed to do in legislation that's passed in the interim between when we drafted that report and now.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that the committee should look at. The question I have is with regards to timing, where DOH may already be in the process, as I believe they are, of producing the 2025. I think that study will probably lag behind the production of this particular plan. So it's something that perhaps should be reviewed for subsequent plans, but I don't know that the timing will align. But it's certainly, there are probably components of that study that will inform a lot of these different, that could inform a lot of these different elements.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No, and thank you, Nika and Kylie. I did add that into the notes to just, make sure we compare all of this with the housing bill that's passed, so we can, take a look at all of that. So that's great. The next one, identify opportunities, incentives for rehabilitation and preservation. Must identify opportunities and incentives for rehabilitation and preservation of existing homes and buildings. Additionally, the consolidated plan should incorporate preservation targets for those existing deed restricted units reaching the end of their affordability term.
Yep, same notes here. I might add for this one and the one after it on the housing quality and healthy homes that I do think this is an area where potential additional state resources, it's something we talked about but didn't add in here, may be applicable. In other words, if the state is identifying places where additional housing investment could be used, ideally housing quality and healthy homes as well as preservation, rehabilitation are areas where we sorely need more resources, but primarily for the purposes of this plan and incorporating in the consolidated housing plan, I think the same notes are appropriate here as well as for the CAPER item below too.
Right. Other thoughts, comments? Francis?
Under this address housing quality and healthy homes, just a note that the Inflation Reduction Act includes many programs, both tax incentives and also rebates that can improve the energy efficiency of homes. And those can also be used to improve the healthiness and the quality of those homes. So we may want to make sure that that's coordinated as well with DEEP.
Great. Okay. We just talked about the housing quality, healthy homes. So expand evaluation and prior performance and align it with AAP and CAPER.
This would also involve OPM.
I'm sorry, Kylie?
I would say, sorry, I jumped the gun while you were still reading that. I was going to say the only difference between these and the others is that it would, I believe, involve OPM because they currently oversee portions of AAP and CAPER, I believe. So it would, again, the consolidated plan preparation lies with DOH, but this is one of those places where aligning it with other state departmental plans is what is being suggested.
Okay. And then, anything else on that? And then, non-funding housing strategies in alignment with outside actors and plans. Plan could and should go beyond funding implementation goals and be a better vehicle for housing planning in the state by incorporating non-funding housing strategies and contemplating outside actors and plans.
Yep. And again, this would be, again, potentially additional capacity for DOH. Our plan recommended, which does not show up in here, additional staff positions at DOH in order to help support these. It wasn't one of the sort of bulleted things, but in the plan, I wanted to note that we did recommend additional staffing for DOH to potentially, I forgot, I will go back and look at the plan, exactly what we recommended, but additional staff capacity. So again, putting that in the financial impact, I think is important since it was a recommendation within the plan, or at least noted that things like the housing needs assessment and the additional capacity required to beef up these different elements of the plan might require more humans. Okay, and we can move to the last one, I think, unless
Thank you.
any questions.
And then, yeah, the last one is incorporate input from people with lived expertise in order to develop housing that is truly representative of the choice and needs of those it is serving. The planning and development of the consolidated plan should incorporate input from people with lived expertise of homelessness and housing insecurity.
Yep, and here I would note the financial impact would require ideally compensating those individuals for their time and expertise. This is something that is important, just as many of us are paid for our roles to be here. Folks who have this type of expertise are often not, meaning paid as part of like my job, right, to be here, even though I'm effectively volunteering for the state commission. So there's other types of compensation that can go with that, assisting people with technology or transportation. So I just wanted to call that out. The remainder should be as the notes are in the prior sections.
Thank you. Anything else on anyone wants to bring up under this section? Okay. Then we will move on, and I've got to see who else is on that can help run us through. So we've got that one done. What's our next one? How about if we look at do we have who's model codes? Of course, I didn't bring my list of who.
Yeah, well, I'm here. It's David
there you are.
Barkin,
Thank you.
and Francis is here. You can add to the
So
joy.
We'll
Yeah.
go through these the few here for on model codes. I think we've got 1, 2, 3. Yeah, four or five of them there. So let's start off with the first one. Model codes provide funding to engage a consultant or multiple consultants to develop voluntary model code guidelines for municipalities. So definitely provide funding. It would definitely be a financial impact.
Sure, we've talked about this. We don't have the expertise to develop those guidelines in-house, so we need experts to do that. We identified one, I can't remember the name, that does done a lot of work within Connecticut, Chicago-based, was used both in Hartford and I'm not sure the other places, but I think we identified even a cost earlier as well, I thought, for something like that. And I thought it might have even been a placeholder in the bond authorization. I'm not sure what happened with that, maybe.
Okay, we can go back and look if we, if there's a specific number on there. So this is more of an administrative, not a legislative piece, except for budget, if there's something in budget. I'll clean this up later once I get that. So there we go. Yeah, and since administrative, it's really going to be under not a legislative committee. And looking at that, obviously doing this probably more immediate than the future
Right.
on that for the study. Okay, there we go. Clean that up a little bit after. Oops, hit this, okay. The next one is enhance land use planning capacity at the state level and provide sufficient resources to better integrate statewide objectives and local land use decisions. Office of Responsible Growth should develop support and incentives to help improve planning practice in Connecticut, including the adoption of model code guidelines by local governments.
So that would be, I think, 0 financial impact. And administrative, yeah.
Is that right? And is that consistent with how you did the previous bucket of things? Because when Kylie was speaking, she basically assumed that if something required staff who did not currently work for the state, that it would have a financial impact or fiscal impact. And I don't know that there's a person who works for the state right now within whose job description this would fall.
Well, I would, so my assumption is, and she's on the line, that this would fall under Rebecca Auger's expertise. And Rebecca, please comment, because if not, then we need to carry a cost associated with it.
I guess I would say that if it is trying to implement model code, then no, we do not have staff currently that could work on that.
Yep. So I think what we'll put here is potential staff needs.
Yeah.
On that, because it depends, what it is. I think if the staffing's got to, develop and everything else, or to carry out a certain piece of it, based upon what duties are, we'd have to just kind of double check the thing. So we'll put potential staff needs on.
See, I don't think this was specific to model code guidelines. It was something that kind of was an ancillary suggestion that might have had overlap in other working groups.
Okay, so you would say more like technical support type of thing, David? Is that what you're looking at?
Well, if you look at the language of it, develop support incentives to help improve planning practice in Connecticut. I think it was about trying to integrate, having policy to integrate better planning processes. In other words, actually strengthening, the Office of Responsible Growth. I believe that was the intention of the comment when it was added in there.
That is my
Francis?
recollection too, insofar as our planning and zoning commissions are we appreciate their spirit of volunteerism, but it is again just a volunteer activity for them, and they do not necessarily collect and analyze data themselves. They may not be experts in case law, in what happens in the General Assembly, in what is working and not working in other parts of the state and other parts of the country. And additional technical resources at the state level could disseminate information to planning and zoning commissioners that they could take advantage of to help improve their processes and their codes and outputs.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll note that here, and I made a note in the note column as well about technical, assistance there. The next one, facilitate the incorporation of best practices into municipal regulation standards and processes. Adoption of best practices such as model code guidelines is a challenge in part because local regulation standards and processes vary significantly. Few practices can be adopted without some legwork translating those practices into a local framework.
So I think that's a wordy way of saying that there is a cost associated with it. And that I think our thought there was that there should be a way of providing, I guess, some kind of grant funding or something for municipalities to implement these kinds of guidelines if they choose to, if they see value in them. You know, so you have a model, but the model needs to then be modified to the specifics of the municipality. Now, the COGS we thought would be the vehicle for something like that, but I mean, it's complicated to develop a grants program, so.
Right. Okay. Oops. Do these right. Okay, and then the last one, improve coordination to support effective and efficient plan implementation. I think that's more administrative as well from what.
Yeah, I think that was also to have it up on the COG level to provide expertise as well. Francis, do you have any other insights there?
Sure. Thanks, David. On the previous one, I think you were right on the money in referring to grants. The state has historically, from time to time, provided grants for municipalities to update their plans of conservation development, which have a 10-year period of validity. The same cannot be said for zoning, but zoning is what is legally binding. So providing resources for zoning updates could help modernize some of those regulations. On coordination, really, it's just a lot more communication between the state, municipalities with each other. It's probably a bandwidth challenge right now. People are so busy, and they definitely do look to the COGs and others to be experts to know what's going on in other towns, other states. Better information will produce better results.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else on the model codes? That could be. Okay. Thank you, Dave and Francis. Appreciate that. Moving on, we'll go down to the it's right there, the affordable housing plans. And then if we've got time, it looks like we may be able to zap through all these today as a first run, which is great. Affordable housing plans. Do we have our co-chairs on?
Tim Hollister is here.
Hi, Tim. Thank you.
I saw
Yes,
Representative.
I'm using my laptop, so I can't see everybody on the screen, so I appreciate it.
Okay, I saw Representative Lamar was also logged in. I don't know if he's on them at the moment.
Terrific. Thank you.
I am on as well, but I'll defer to you, Tim, as we've done that all over the last year and a half.
Okay.
Terrific. So the first one, direct towns in a specific timetable to revise their 21-22 plans in light of the guidance stated in this report.
Yeah, Mr. Heft, if I could just take a moment, I might be able to streamline this a little bit. There's 5 listed there, which is true to the text of our report. But in my mind, it devolves into 4, or maybe 3, I should say. The first is clearly administrative, and that's the last one, which is requiring or asking the Department of Housing to publish a model affordability plan. And this suggestion came directly from several of the planners, Connecticut planners who have worked on the affordable housing plans and reports. I believe DOH has the authority to undertake that task under the existing 830G statute, which gives them the power to adopt implementing regulations. And indeed, at least back in the early 2000s, we did a model deed restriction. And so this is a very similar effort. And so I think that's whether a consultant might be hired. In fact, in 2002, I was the consultant that did the model deed restriction. I think I get paid $1.50 or something like that. But that's okay. So I think there's probably some minimal financial impact, but I think it's administrative action, and it could be accomplished within a couple months. So I think that's the last item on the list there. We want to discuss that.
Terrific. Great. So we'll continue running through the rest of them here, and we can.
Okay.
Uh,
right. The next two it could either be legislation or administrative through DOH, depending on how much our appetite for biting off controversy and fights over top-down state mandates versus local choice. But the two ideas are the affordability plan itself. The report that our working group prepared obviously has two sections with very long and fairly detailed lists of what affordable housing plans should contain. And you'll recall what we call the overlap problem, which was that the towns were drafting their reports in 2021 and 2022, while our working group was working on guidance for what a model plan should contain. But we now have our list. So the question is whether the state, the legislature, or DOH, or some combination want to now create some kind of a mandate as to what an affordable housing plan should contain. And I don't know, I can talk for hours about this if you want, but I think that's the generic task that would be the first, second, and third recommendations there. And so it would include a recommendation about who actually adopts the plan, but it's taking the what we call the menu in the report and putting it onto a framework that would either ask, suggest, or require the towns in their next implementation of affordable housing reports to follow what's in the report. And how much discretion we give them would be the major debate.
Right. And so,
and then just to finish off
before you do that, Tim, because
Yes,
I
sir.
want to make sure we just code these, properly. So those first three, are those going to need legislative action?
Well, I think we should
require the
start. We
towns
should
to do
start
that?
there. Yeah, we should start there if we could find an easier way. But I think those three would be legislative.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure we're in agreement so we can. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the last item, which is really the sort of a combination, is I'll call it expanding on Public Act 21-29, which, as many of you will recall, had three categories: zoning regulations shall, zoning regulations shall not, and zoning regulations may. And I think the working group report fleshes a lot of those out. Says in section 6 of the report, it says, okay, if you want to conform your current zoning regulations to that act, here's what you need to do. And then section 7, the so-called menu, is, and if you want to go further, here are all the subject matters that you want to look at. So I think we should start by calling it legislative. But over a couple of months, I think there's enormous food for thought as to how we implement 21-29 and the working group's report further. And I'll just throw in one editorial comment, which I certainly have not discussed with Representative Lamar's. Obviously I watched, like many of you, the housing bill, and I was rooting for certain sections and maybe not so much for others, but the point is that I think the message of the working group report is, aside from all the things that were discussed in the housing bill that was adopted with many provisions stripped out, that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there in the nature of just reducing barriers that are in existing zoning regulations, barriers to affordable housing. And believe me, I am not in all trying to advocate, let's, tear down local choice. I view these recommendations as things that towns can do to streamline their regulations and clarify their regulations and take away unnecessary barriers without impacting the fundamental principle of local choice that so many hold dear. So again, I can talk for hours about the specifics, but I think it's a legislative effort to try to expand on Public Act 2129. And that would really fall under the third bullet, consider adopting specific recommendations of this report. So yeah, that one, and maybe that should have specifically referenced 2129, but that was the intent.
Yeah, underlining that, Martin, is really the factor that as we reviewed each individual affordable housing plan developed by the municipalities, Tim, I think, read all 160 of the ones that have been submitted. The reality is, as much as we've heard, and Representative Rojas can relate about how local towns know best and local communities know themselves best, and they know how to handle this. The state of Connecticut has provided a significant amount of funding to help communities develop local affordable housing plans, and they were not up to par with, I think, what the legislative standard was that we envisioned when we passed the bill and the requirement a number of years ago. And you just heard from the model code, like the towns need a lot of help and guidance on this.
Right. So,
but provide those very specific criteria.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, was it your suggestion that Representative Lamar and I reconvene the working group to fill out the charter, or is it something that we as co-chairs are asked to do, or something in between?
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. So I think what we're looking at is not necessarily have to reconvene the whole, working group. That's up to you, but it would be more so to just kind of review this outline that I've, typed in as we were all discussing today, to kind of review and make sure that we've captured everything correctly on that, for your group. I don't think you need to reconvene unless you feel there's a need to, if you needed further clarification. But I think, the co-chairs, and these are all based off of your reports that were done, should be able to determine, the pieces here.
Okay. And one thing I'll add is I haven't read the entire housing bill, but I've read the summary. I don't think, and Representative Rojas can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's anything in the housing bill that just passed that touches on any of the recommendations that as to our working group.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tin and Representative Lamar.
Okay.
And we're going to come up then to sewage. Betsy Gara, go ahead.
I did just want to point out, and I did put it in the chat box, that there was a change to the Affordable Housing Plan Statute 830J. It does now require that any plan or plan updates submitted on or after October 1st, 2023 have to actually address affordable housing unit accessibility for individuals with developmental disabilities. So that is certainly a new layer that they're going to have to recognize. And I think they may need to pull in some guidance from some other state agencies in order to ensure that they successfully address that.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Betsy. Appreciate it. Do we have our sewage co-chairs on? Sure, which is look, we may or may not. I don't know. Correct. I don't think she's on. And is there anyone on from the sewage committee? Okay, so maybe not hearing that someone is on for that, maybe we'll leave that one so we can come back to that and review. Let me save this document here. And what we will do, as mentioned, is to I'll get this cleaned up a little bit, make sure all my spelling errors are corrected on here, and get that out to all of the co-chairs of the working group so they can review it. update it, and then at our next meeting, we'll actually be going through that for which would be included or anything that don't want to include in coming up with our final report. Mr. Co-Chair, anything you want to add on any of that?
Mr. Heft, this is Tim Hollister. Didn't the sewage portion of the housing bill that just passed address a number of the sewage working group recommendations?
That maybe, yeah, we'll take a look at that to
Okay.
see which pieces have been done in that.
Okay.
There was a piece in there that transferred the responsibility from deep to DPH or DPH to deep.
Correct, for
Correct.
the number of
For the community.
7,500 to
Exactly.
10,000 gallons.
Yep.
Something like that. There's a piece in there of that, yes.
And a hefty piece of new regulations about septic system standards goes to DEP.
Correct, yes. So we'll make note of that in that section as well. Yep. Okay, so at our next meeting, which is July 10th, we'll be going again through all of these recommendations to try to finalize where we're at with them and to decide upon including them in our final recommendations and then start drafting our final report. So the next meeting is on July 10th. Is there other business to come before the commission? Seeing none. Is there any public comment? Is there any comment from any of our members? Seeing any, and I know we didn't have anyone sign up for public comment that I'm aware of. So with that, at 4:02, we will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Greg. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Representative, thank you. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.